Welcome to Behind the Thin Blue Line, a Whisper in the Shadows podcast. In each city, in every neighbourhood, on every street, they stand tall. Those in blue, guardians of our community, our protectors. But who are they really? Behind the Thin Blue Line is the podcast that takes you behind the badge, beyond the headlines, and into the hearts of those who serve and protect. We're here to break down barriers and to tear down the walls of misunderstanding. We're here to listen to their stories, their triumphs, their fears. Ever wonder what it's like serving undercover? Or what's the real-life impact of policing? Or how they cope with trauma? Listen as we step into the shoes of those who walk the thin blue line. You have heard my true stories of what it's really like to be an undercover cop. I want to give a voice to all those living amongst us, unseen and unnoticed, who have put their life on the line being a police officer. Hopefully to give you, the listener, a glimpse into something you will likely never get to experience. Uncover the complex world of law enforcement and the raw human experiences behind the badge. Join me, Jason Somerville, your host and a former police officer myself, as we navigate through these stories on Behind the Thin Blue Line. Let's go and meet our next guest. Welcome back to part 2 of my conversation with Ben Schultz. Let's get on with that discussion. What I want to get is, so you'd had enough. You've gone. Maybe I can change how things are happening by entering politics.
Yes.
What happened there?
So basically, I mean, if you look at Northern Territory Police, is a very small police force. There was only 1,200 of us back then. I mean, there was only about 1,000, I think, when I first joined. So, I mean, I knew. So, to tell you a story, I was at an event in Borroloola, which was, I think, it was 150 years cease, and the courts had been in Borroloola, and so it was a big, and the commissioner flew down, which was, and I will mention his name, it's Rhys Kershaw. He's the commissioner of the FP at the moment, and he was our commissioner at the time. And so we're sitting there, I'm being my usual larrikin self. We had court on at the time. I was a police prosecutor, so I'm sitting there talking to the magistrate and, or judge as they're called now, but magistrate and all that sort of thing, because I was on a good first name basis with a lot of them because I've been prosecuting for a while. And anyway, the commissioner walks over and he goes, "You always know the table with Schultzy on it. It's always the loudest one." So, I mean, if you think of anybody in the police force, there's not many commissioners that would know somebody's personality and also their name, just rocking up at an event. So we were fortunate in the way that it was very close, a community sort of thing. And I mean, it doesn't mean that everybody knew the commissioner. I was very outspoken. Like I said, that when we took on the police,
I find that hard to believe.
Yeah, well, when we took on the police, when my ex-wife had that drama and all that sort of thing, I got very well known. The police association, I took them on at the same time because I had a problem with them and won against them as well. And I also, they did a promotional video when I was out at Ramangini, trying to get people in recruiting to go out to these locations. So there's a 5-minute video on YouTube of me out at Ramangini policing, and they used me as a promotion with two other stations they did it with as well. So just to try and get, and if you look at it, it was funny. One of the comments was they had me doing an interview as part of that 5-minute clip. And anyway, it got all sent in and the commissioner had to look over it to get approved. And he looks at it and he goes, "You're just going to have to do the interview again." I said, "Why is that?" He said, "The 5 o'clock shadow of his beard, because he should be clean shaven." So they actually flew me back into Darwin. They actually flew me into Darwin so I could do the interview in there instead of out at Ramangini because they'd already done all the filming.
So you had to make sure you came with a...
Oh, I did, yeah. What was funny is I forgot my name badge when I went in there.
She just asked a question for his. I'll just put yours on. Right, so can you tell me what happened? What precipitated you leaving? What was the story behind you leaving? How long had you been in the job at that point?
So I've been in the job for basically close to 10 years when I decided to leave. And then I took basically a year's leave without pay to basically just to try and figure out where I wanted, just to try and relax. And I'd been flat out by that stage, I mean, my whole career. I hadn't stopped. if an opportunity came up, I went for it. And as you can see from what I've talked about, like my experiences, it was just, if there was a job, I did it. And that was probably part of the reason why, it didn't work out with my ex-wife as well. If there was a job out bush, I took it. If the police wanted it, I did it. And I gained a lot of experience. But I remember Damo saying, and so the other half of the ordinary cop, he said an ordinary person would be dead. He said the amount of work you were doing is phenomenal. And I mean, I loved it. I lived the job. But with that kind of the responsibility or the knowledge of knowing, and I said this before we got cut off, but I had to justify the job. Like every time you went to an incident, if you got a complaint, you had to justify why you made those decisions, why you did this, why you did that. There was so much paperwork. If I wanted a prisoner flown on police air wing, you had to do a risk assessment about this, that. Every time something went wrong in the police, they created another piece of paperwork, which you had to fill out. So, for a job that used to take you half an hour, or who am I kidding? A file to take up, a file that used to take you, say, 2 hours to do, a simple file, would take you 4 hours to do, because of the extra bits and pieces of paperwork you had to fill out. And these pieces of paperwork were predominantly put in because the department didn't have the right people doing the job at the time. And so an incident had arisen that they didn't have the qualified people to take care of it. So it was, and look, do I blame the police department? No. I mean, there's a lot of many factors that come into it. The bosses, I think, a lot of the time are trying to do the best that they can, but it all goes through the government and all that sort of funding and, resources and all that sort of stuff. And so I thought, well, instead of trying to keep banging my head against a brick wall and moving up through the ranks, why don't I try and influence politics or go into politics to try and fix it from the top end? Now, I'm gonna be a bit harsh here about the way I say this, but I was always one of the first people to sit there and when I talk about the police force, and I always said that they couldn't organise a route in a brothel with a fistful of 50s. And I'll tell you, but one of the funniest things is when I actually got involved in politics, it makes the police force look like a well-oiled machine.
And I think that's a common misconception with, and I'll come back to this, but I think that's a common misconception by police and probably anyone else really for that matter, that when you've got to that point where you go, you know what, fuck it, I'm leaving, you think everything else is going to be better, that nothing can be as bad as where you are.
Yeah.
The way the world is designed, it's just dysfunctional.
Yeah, definitely. It really opened my eyes up, I suppose, when I left. I just thought, wow, no wonder the poor police force is struggling, and health and everything and education and all that sort of thing. When you look at some of the Muppets up high, in the political spectrum. And what's a shame is there are some really good politicians as well, but they've just drowned out by the idiots, which is such a shame.
By the ideologues.
Yeah.
So how did you go? Did you get elected?
No, I basically, I got involved with the party, and I'm still involved in it now. And I always had plans to run even in this state election. But basically, I started the podcast with Damo, and that got very popular.
Yep.
And the problem with politics is you're controlled about what you can say. Whereas in the podcast, there's nobody telling Damo and I what we can and cannot do.
Well, you haven't had any lawyers' letters turn up yet. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. And look, if I did run, all they'd have to do to find something on me is listen to the podcast.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah. And it's quite interesting that a profession like politics, where it's all supposed to be about, you doing things and looking after the populace and saying what you mean, and then you're not allowed to.
Yeah.
Kind of like policing, where you're there looking after the populace, keeping them safe, but you're not allowed to say what you really think.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, mate, and I think,
and a bit like teaching and all those sorts of jobs.
Yeah. I mean, my hat goes off and my heart goes out to the paramedics and the people in health. They're doing a very, very tricky job, and teachers too. Like, geez, I mean, I always felt sorry for the teachers when I was in the police. At least we had powers, to do something.
That's very true. I bet the only people you don't feel sorry for are the fireys because they get to sleep
Oh.
9 hours a day.
Mate, look, I'll say this joke. Why are there police?
Why?
So fireys can have heroes.
And I know there are a couple of fireys that listen to one of the previous episodes of firing.
I tell every
Okay.
that one, mate. So
there's a very keen rivalry.
Yeah.
So just want to sort of go off on a little bit of a tangent here. I'll come back to some of these other things that we've been talking about. What did you want to be when you were a kid?
I wanted to be a police officer. That was my
Okay. So you grew up wanting to be a police officer.
Yeah, because I saw my uncle, and I remember mum and dad got some little small police shirts for me. I kind of like to touch on something here. When I was growing up, grew up an hour north of Bundaberg, a little place called Berrijonda. Mum and dad had a farm out there, and I used to go to school in Rosedale and used to be on the bus. Back in the days when kids caught the bus to school, and anyway, and I would get bullied on that bus every day. I was only a little kid. I'd be on the bus with my brothers, but my brothers, two older brothers, they're lovely people, but they're not, not tough guys by any stretch of the imagination. They got, born with more brains than brawn, so to speak. And there was one day I was pretty tough as a kid, and I look back now, I was definitely very resilient, and like this kid bullied me every day, and my mum had always taught me ignore them, and they won't keep bullying you. And anyway, I remember this one day on the bus, and he was sitting behind me, and he kept on bullying, just saying stuff, and I just ignored him, just pretended he wasn't there, and he actually punched me in the back of the head. He was 2 years older than me. And my head flew forward. And you remember the old seats in the bus?
With the steel bars, yeah.
And my head butted that. It really hurt. And I remember back the time when I felt like crying, but I didn't. I still didn't react. I sat there and I just didn't react. I had tears in my eyes, but I knew, just don't give in to him. Don't make him show that he's beating you down. But it was at that stage my next door neighbour actually stood up and challenged the bully and said, "You will not touch this kid anymore." And the bullying stopped as of that day. And I, for weeks, I can't remember how long, I was pretty young at the time. And I remember for weeks after, I would pretend to be my guardian angel, that guy that stood up to the bully. And then I reckon it was probably about a month later, and I remember thinking to myself, why can't I be him? Why can't I be that person that stands up against the bullies? And from that day forward, that's what I've done. I've been in more fights in my life for other people than I have for myself. So, and all the way through even that school, all the way through high school, I went to boarding school here in Brisbane. And, there was a real pecking order in the boys' boarding house. I have lost count the amount of fights I've been in just protecting other people.
Why didn't you join the police straight away?
I think it took me a long time to figure out, if you look at my, I got a very low OP, or very high OP, whatever you do. I was basically the bottom of the class, mind you. I was I was lucky enough to go to a very prestigious school where it was very, very highly ranked. And so of course I was the bottom ranked at that school. I've always been more a practical person than a theoretical. And that showed even in the police college. I struggled with the theory in the police college to the point that I couldn't almost pass exams. Then I found my niche and I found out how to learn, and I went from like 65% to just about 90%. Because actually, you'll be able to actually understand this. It was a good friend of mine said to me, I was trying to write everything out, and I'm a very slow writer. But he said, "How do you learn stuff when you're in school?" And I said, "I love doing plays." And he said, "Well, learn to play. So just read it out and learn." And I did. And I went from 65% to 90% in my exams. So just by reading and reciting.
And we're probably going off on a tangent here, but one thing that schools don't do is equip kids with understanding how they learn, because it's all about, here it is on the blackboard, here it is in a piece of paper, here it is on a book. You just learn it. Whereas, you've got so many. You were talking about that you wanted to be a police officer from childhood, but you obviously didn't get the OP, and you worked out why, I guess, or how you learn once you got to the academy.
Yeah.
What did you do after you finished school?
Well, when I first left school, so I met, I I suppose I hooked up with a girlfriend at school, and her father was a cray fisherman up north, up in Torres Straits. So he dived for a tropical rock lobster up there. And so when I left school, she had to go to uni, and so she went to Toowoomba because that was close to me. And I'd been working in the fruit shop. My parents didn't have a hell of a lot of money. They were lucky enough to send me to quite a good school with a bit of government help and all that sort of thing. So I used to work a lot in fruit stores, in holidays. So I used to call school a holiday, which is probably reflected in my OP score. But I'm more of a social sort of person, I suppose. And so I basically went back to work in the fruit store, and I also started my own business doing lawn mowing and landscaping and all that sort of stuff. Just to try and keep the money ticking over. And in those, it was probably right up to 2007. I left school in 94. So right up until probably the end of the 90s, or about 97, I used to go fly up to Torres Straits or Thursday Island on holidays when it was holiday time. And my ex-father-in-law used to take me crayfishing or diving for rock lobster, which kind of freaked me out when I first did it, because it's a pretty dangerous profession. And I did that so when she actually finished uni, I went up there full time and worked on the boat, and got my own boat dinghy. I was a subcontractor off the boat. You work about 120 days a year. The rest of the time you're just doing stuff on the boat or going on holidays and all that sort of thing. So you need to make sure you earn a lot of money. So I did that for right up until about 2006 is when I finished off, and then basically it was one of those things where I invested a whole lot of more money into my business up there, because they were doing restrictions and that in the fishery, or I'd go and do something else. And I'd already broken up with my first wife by that stage, so I figured that basically it wasn't good for relationships going out to, because you're going out to sea for 120 days a year, you're not around home much and all that sort of thing. And towards the end of 2005, I'd met, and I was going out with my next wife-to-be wife, I suppose. And she was a teacher, or just started teaching up in Port Douglas. So basically, when I left, and my dad suggested that I go over, and my uncle suggested I go to the Northern Territory Police. So I put in an application.
Yep.
And my ex wife now, she put in for teaching over there and got it straight away. And so we just moved over, and then I started in the police. So yeah.
Do you ever get the feeling that you pick jobs that anti-marriage?
Well, yes. Funnily enough, and I think I said to you before, whether on this or off it, and I've said I was always a sucker for punishment. I always put 100% into everything that I did, and policing was no difference. If they, like I said, I think before, that if I went out bush, if they wanted someone to go out bush, I went out bush. I just did everything I possibly could to because I loved policing. It was my life. And that obviously reflected in my marriage as well, because I was just so involved in the job. I loved it. I really policing. It's my ultimate job. It always has been. It's in my blood. That will be the best career I will ever have in my life. So it's I really loved it, and I was born to be a police officer. Unfortunately, I think that the police force is a structure these days that isn't really suited to my style of policing, and if we put it that way.
You were born too late. Is that what you?
Yes, mate. Yeah, definitely. I joined the Northern Territory. It was like a last frontier, so they hadn't really caught up with the other states, and you were left. You had a lot of autonomy, and I really enjoyed being in control. I'll actually tell you a funny story. This is later on in my career, towards the end, and I had a bit of a disagreement with one of my sergeants over a planned event, And anyway, my senior sergeant, he was actually off duty. He was fishing at the time, but he overheard the discussion, let's say.
Yeah.
And anyway, I was walking back up to my house, and because he was staying with me out there when we were out at Borroloola, and he goes, "Oh, what was that?" And I said, "Oh, just some miscommunication and blah blah blah." Anyway, he goes, he said, "She obviously didn't get the memo." I said, "What memo?" He said, we tell you what to do, and then you do whatever the fuck you want anyway.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see a pattern in that from talking to you about those sorts of things. Okay, look, talking about I guess about stories probably is a good time to sort of go into what are some of the more standout war stories or worries that you have that sort of shine the light on what life's really like as a copper in the Northern Territory.
I think, look, I mentioned one earlier, and that was Damo said, when he went to when you're working in Indigenous communities, you can get up to 300 people fighting. I had one memorable one for me was, I think it was around 2014 or 15, and basically what people need to understand, there's different tribes. There's so many different tribes of Aboriginals, and the tribes hate each other a lot of the time. So they'll have grievances that go back centuries, from something that happened back in the 1800s and so on and so forth. So what happened was Elcho Island had come over to Ramangini, and I can't even remember. It was probably over two people having an argument. That's how these fights basically start out. And it was quite big. Like, it was probably about 300 to 500 people, and they're like just fighting, and it's just happening all over town. And we're going through, but we could walk through as cops and not get touched. The fight was between the tribes, not between the police. So, but we got to the stage where I still remember vividly a guy getting stabbed in front of me, and I had to grab him and pull him back and get him to the clinic and all that sort of stuff. It's, but I mean, we were lucky because that's their grievance was with each other, not with us. But in the end, it went on for about half a day, and I was on the phone to the superiors all the time, and they'd agreed that they would send TRG, which is our, I think, CERT, it's called here in Queensland. And basically, I yelled out over the top of them. I said, "I'm on the phone to my commander right now, and they will have, the TRG out here within 4 hours if you don't stop this fighting." And the people from Elcho Island had many years ago, there was someone shot when a similar thing was going on by people in the TRG. So they were quite terrified of the TRG actually coming out there.
Yep.
And so they literally, it stopped instantly, and they got on a plane or boats and went back to Elcho Island. So
I'm surprised they didn't go 4 hours. That gives us another 3 hours of doing it time to get on.
But that was there's some pretty intense jobs when you're out there and you're outnumbered. There was only 3 cops there at the time. So there's not really a lot you can do. You've just got to manage it the best you can. So anything else? And I'll do this because you got me to tell a couple of stories on your podcast. So what's a funny type of incident that's occurred where you look back and oh my God, why did I? It was early on, and I tell this one fairly regularly. It's a fairly funny story. So we were a good mate of mine he's still in the police actually up in Darwin, and but I'll name him. I named him in our podcast when I told the story, so I'll name him here. But Andrew Duggan, and we call him Duggo. And he was a squad just after us. And we were driving around one night. This is probably, we were only pretty fresh in the police then. Like, we would only been a year or something in policing. And anyway, we're driving around east side Catherine. And Catherine is a very busy town. And you get a call. It's about 9 or 10 o'clock, I think. And we get this call over the radio, 481, I think our car was. And they said, "Can you attend down the main street of Catherine? We've got a woman walking towards Kalana community. She's got a 6-month-old in one arm and a machete in the other, and she's walking to Kalana to kill her husband."
I know.
So, yeah, I mean, you've been in the police before, and any police officer understand going, holy shit, how do you handle this one? And so anyway, the funny thing down, and you know what we always do is risk assess when we go into these jobs.
Yep.
So we're going down there, and I said to Dago, I turned to him, I said, mate, how are we going to do this? Like, how are we going? He goes, well, he said, you've got the taser, you taser her, and I'll catch the baby. So anyway, that was our risk assessment when we got there. Good plan.
Yeah, great planning.
So anyway, we get down there, and by the time we get down there, she's actually crossing the high level bridge, which is just to the north of Catherine, heading up towards Darwin. And so we pull up on the bridge. Now you've got to think the Stewart Highway. It's a big highway. It's a main thoroughfare from Darwin right down to basically Adelaide. So there's a lot of traffic going, to and forth, and we've actually cut the traffic off. She's walking on the pedestrian part of the bridge, and so Duggo's gone around and run over and actually jumped over and tried to talk to her. He's standing about 10 meters back. Luckily, somebody's already taken the kid off her, so she hasn't got the 6-month-old. So
yep.
Our risk assessment was out the window, but we could go with the rest of it. And anyway, so he's trying to talk to her, trying to calm her down and all this sort of stuff, and just keep his distance and trying to get her to put the machete down, all that sort of thing. And I was walking up on a diagonal from behind her, so I was at a 45 degree coming up behind her, and she had a backpack on as well, and basically I had the taser out and drawn and ready to shoot. Anyway, she's basically got the shits in the end with whatever Duggo was saying, and she's lifted like the machete up, and she said, if you're not going to fucking help me, then, and he just turned to me, Duggo, calm as anything, he goes, light her up, Schultzy. So it wasn't, there's none of this deploy the taser or any crap like that. It was light her up.
It was light her up, yeah.
Anyway, so I fired the taser, and anybody that understands tasers, where your dot is, which you got a red dot, that's where the first bulb goes, and it shoots straight and it hits. The other bulb goes on a 45 degree diagonal, like down. So you've got to you've got to be like, it's perfect if you're front on or back on. When you're a little bit to the side, however, you've got to be really accurate, because the second bulb will miss, and that's what happened. So she, though, in that instant, she got hit. She thought she'd been shot, because it hits with quite an impact, those little barbs.
Yep.
And she's dropped the machete. However, I'm sitting there going, oh shit, I've stuffed up, but I didn't turn the taser off before, because we got spare cartridges. So I actually grabbed the cartridge while it was still cycling to take it off, and I tasered myself. So I got zapped in front of about 50 people, 50 onlookers. I actually tasered myself.
Oh, that's hilarious. I left just before we got tasers. And one of the things that I was probably glad was that when we got given pepper spray, you actually had to, be sprayed so you knew what it was like.
Yep.
So that way, then when you deployed it, you knew what effect you were having on the people you were deploying it on. Thankfully, I'd left just as tasers were being deployed. So I, touch wood, have never been tasered. And I'm pretty sure that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Just quietly. I've been with, you get into enough issues with pepper spray. I've been, standing behind someone and doing a, at the time, legal lateral vascular restraint.
Yep.
A week later, not so.
Yeah.
And someone goes, "Oh, I'll just spray them," and Stu moves his head, and you cop the full force of the spray and that sort of stuff. So I can imagine what it'd be like with a taser. I'd be changing. What are they called? Police pants all the time. I probably wet myself each time I get tasered. All right. What I want to do is sort of go a little bit into one of the things that I talk about in this podcast is PTSD and some of the effects that I've had, and because I've been out for such a longer time, you tend to notice it more than when you just leave.
Yep.
What about you? Because you didn't go in straight from a young age. You did other things. You had life experience.
Yeah.
Do you feel that you have any signs of PTSD?
Yeah, I definitely do. Damo and I, like, I think part of the reason that I survived, like even going through the police with being reasonably sane and healthy, was because basically Damo, he was like, we were inseparable, like always talking, catch up. If we had a problem, like something happened in the police, we'd just discuss it. And, it's a burden, spread across two shoulders. You're carrying half the weight.
Yep.
And I'll touch on something that's basically, I mean, this is, and you probably know it as well. When you go further on in your career, you become a little bit complacent to a sense, or a little bit, it doesn't excite you as much, like the jobs. And I'll touch on, so there was one when I was in Borroloola, this is my last year in the police, and this mental guy was carrying on, and he, we got caught up there. He's mentally ill. He's going off. The family are terrified from him. He's threatening them with weapons and all that sort of stuff. And anyway, I'm usually quite good at chatting to people. I can talk them into the cage. I don't like using force, but I will if it's necessary and all that sort of thing. Man, I'd rocked up. My pepper spray on my belt hadn't had pepper spray in it for about 3 years. Like, I always use the party packs, which is the Mark 9, like it's a little fire extinguisher.
Yep.
And I didn't have the taser on, but my partner, she had the taser and she had the Mark 9. And anyway, so we're there and I'm trying to chat to him, and he basically gets the shits and he throws a milk crate at me, and I deflect it. We're a good 15 meters away and I deflect it. And anyway, I kind of thought, I'm not going to be able to talk this guy down. He's just obviously, he's up with the fairies or whichever land he's on. And I think we're going to have to step this up a notch. And anyway, so I turned to my partner. I said, look, you give me the taser. You hold the pepper spray. So I clipped it on my belt, and I was still talking to him. And about probably a couple of minutes later, he obviously really got the shits that this conversation wasn't going the way he wanted to. And he picked up a tire iron and a screwdriver and basically bolted towards me. And the whole family took off out the front gate of the house. My partner, she ran with them. Anyway, I said, I took a step back and I've gone, no. I've pulled the taser up, I've pulled it out, and I've hit him. Absolutely, it was textbook, absolutely textbook. And, and his head, to the point that the taser hit him perfectly, his head landed at my feet. So that's how close he was. And then I've just turned to my partner. I said, do you want to get back in here? I said, cuff him. And so she's walked in and cuffed him. I said, I'm going to call the clinic because we've got to get him assessed, and, we've got to get these barbs out. Well, we pulled the barbs out. And then I said, all right, we'll take him to the cage. I was on the phone to the clinic. And anyway, we put him in the cage. People don't usually fight after they've been tasered. They're usually pretty compliant.
Yep.
And
compliant. Yep.
Yeah. And so we walked and we put him in the back of the cage and I was walking to because I was driving. I was sitting there thinking, there's no adrenaline. There's nothing. There is nothing at all in my system. I am calm as anything. Anyway, I sat in the front seat and my partner, she got in beside me and she turned to me and she goes, that has got to be the calmest I've seen anybody in a high risk, environment. She goes, you didn't even, there was no flutter. There was no, shaking, there's nothing. And I was sitting there going, shit, there's something wrong with me. There's something seriously wrong with me. Anyway, so I went down, I checked my Apple Watch after. My heartbeat had not skipped a beat. It was exactly the same. It was level. It was just like it was, a Sunday morning having breakfast. And anyway, a couple of weeks later, I actually caught up with Damo. I was up in Darwin for something. And I said, do you want to come and have a beer? And I told him about it. And I said, mate, I think there's something seriously wrong with me. I said, I should be reacting to this stuff, and I'm not. And he just turned to me and he goes, it's the same for me. And, and that to me, I was gone, oh, shit. All right. So other people actually, it's not just me, because I thought I was mentally ill or something, And I think it's part of you see so much trauma in your career as a police officer that you become desensitized to a certain extent. And it is just all normal run of the mill sort of work you're doing. And I think the problem is, though, afterwards, so to talk about the PTSD, I remember when I first left the police and I went to a New Year's Eve celebration, and I couldn't relax. I was sitting there looking for people, trying to sabotage, like blow up this bridge and all that sort of thing. I was just, my partner, who's my partner now, Miriam, she's absolutely beautiful. And she was looking at me and she goes, "Holy shit, you're just on edge." And I was, because I was just worried. You've got a few thousand people at this celebration. There's a bridge. This is a perfect example. Somebody could bloody blow it up and kill 100 people or 1,000 people if they wanted to. And you still get, and you get the heart races for that. Like, your heart rate goes up. You get the chills. You'll suddenly go into this zone where you think something's going to happen. So and I think the more, I've been out, 7 years now, the longer it goes on, it doesn't really diminish much. You can probably comment on that because you've been out for quite a while.
Okay, unfortunately, that's all we have time for this episode of Behind the Thin Blue Line. I hope you're enjoying my conversation with Ben Schultz and telling us his story of how he got into the police. Join me next Tuesday for the next part of this episode and the next part of this discussion with Ben. Hope you have a good day, and I'll chat to you then. Thank you for joining me on Behind the Thin Blue Line, where I have conversations with current and former police officers and they get to tell their stories. I hope you've enjoyed that episode. In the next episode, we'll again explore the human side of policing through more conversations with police officers from around the world. Please make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Lastly, if you're a current or former police officer, I would love to chat to you about your experiences, or if you're feeling dangerous, tell your stories on my podcast. Please get in contact by my email, which is whisperintheshadowspodcast@gmail.com. I look forward to you joining me next week.